Good evening and welcome to the Midnight Bible Study. Talking tonight about a book called You Don't Have to Quit. It's by Anne and Ray Ortlund. And you can probably guess what it's about. It's about, persevere. So I just want to give you some key points that the Ortlunds give in this book. They've got it's a simple book, but it's actually very good. And so they start off by talking about a pattern in the Bible, which is, they call it the ABC pattern, and it truly is in the Bible. It's also, in life. But the pattern that they point out is God would begin with a person or group. They'll have a mission, such as, for example, the Exodus, leave Israel. Okay, whatever it is. Maybe it's build the wall, not the one on the southern border. I'm talking about, the one around Jerusalem, or it could be, take care of the Midianites, whatever it is. God will give a mission to someone. I'm talking, Old Testament at the moment. But certainly in the New Testament, we see the same kind of situations. God would begin, he would with a person or group, and then he'd make them go through a process of pain, hassle, adversity, testing, and toughening. So trouble comes once they set about trying to accomplish something. That's when the trouble begins. And of course, that's true. We see it over and over and over and over and over, that pattern. And then in the Bible, he'd bring them through triumphantly, eventually. Now, it may take a long time. For Moses, it took 40 years since when he first wanted to save his people, and then he killed an Egyptian guard, and he had to flee and basically be a fugitive for 40 years. And then he came back, and finally God fulfilled his mission later on, after the 40 years in exile. But you take the case of Gideon. Now, Gideon was a different story. Gideon was told, basically, I'll give you the real brief version, go attack the Midianites. The only problem is he had, a few thousand soldiers, and the Midianites had 500,000. Now, you can imagine, if you get that kind of a message from God, you're going to, he fled to the underground, the basement, basically the wine cellar. He fled, and he was trying to hide from God. And God said, "Mighty warrior, what are you doing down there in the wine cellar?" And he said, "I want you to go do this." So Gideon said, "Look, I don't know about this. If you really want me to do something that crazy, then go and look. I'll put a fleece out, and if you truly want me to do this, I'm not just getting the wrong message here. Then make that fleece wet. There will be dew on this fleece, but everywhere else will be dry." So he did that, and the next day, sure enough, the fleece was wet with dew, and everything else around it was dry. But it was still an insane mission. So he says, "Well, now wait a minute, God, hold on. I want to try one more time. This time I want the fleece to be dry and everything around it will be wet." So the next day he came back, and sure enough, that was what happened with the dew. And so finally, Gideon said, "All right, let's do it." And this didn't take a lot of time. Unlike Moses, which dragged on for a lot of time, with Gideon, it happened very quickly. And so he basically went on this mission. And he's going up against a lot of adversity in terms of his misgivings, his psychology, his courage, because it's a crazy plan. So he's praying, and God says, "No, wait a minute, you got 30,000? Cut that down. I want cut it down to 3,000 men." So he does that. Not without a lot of fretting. That's an insane plan. It was bad enough when he only had this small amount. Now he's cut it by 90%. And then God tells him, "Well, you know what? That's too much. Cut it by another 90%. Get it down to 300 men." And so Midian obeys, gets it down to 300 men, which is a tough way to take on 100 million. And so I'm sorry, not 100 million, 500,000. So Then God gives him a plan. He says, all right, now take all these cows, all these bulls, there was hundreds of them, and put torches to their horns at night, and then when I tell you, run them down the hill. So they did, and so the Midianites were down in their on the plains in their tents, and they see what looks like thousands and thousands and thousands, like a vast army coming at them with these torches, and they're running at a high speed. It was this stampede of all these cows, and and Gideon and his army were following him. But when they saw this army coming, they panicked and they fled, and they ended up attacking each other and wiping each other out. And so by overcoming his fear and following God's guidance, Gideon did the impossible. And that's a true story in the Bible. So God would begin, he'd take them through the process, through testing and toughening, and then he'd bring them through triumphantly. And we see that over and over again in the Bible. So I'm gonna give you a few more points here before we wrap up. Those stories were not actually in the book, but they're just stories from the Bible that fit the pattern. Now, Job is another one. We see the story with Job. Job suffered more than anyone else in the Bible, probably, and more than most people ever suffer. He suffered a lot. Well, I mean, of course, a lot of people suffer, but Job is known for suffering. All right, Job was put through incredible trials, but when he got through his suffering, when he learned the lessons that he needed to learn, then God brought him through to the other side to triumph and victory at the far end. And that's the pattern that we want to see in our troubles. Now, we need to have hope. We can't be negative and gloomy. We need to have hope as we face these troubles and trials and tribulations. And it leads to physiological changes, according to the Ortlunds. Leads to physiological changes in their studies, in their research. They found that hope causes two hormones, cortisol and prolactin, that are strongly affected by an attitude of hope. So this gives us the power we need. It gives us the medicine we need in order to get through our tests and tribulations. And then we need to remember Scripture. For example, look at Romans 8:18 and 19. The sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly awaits for the revealing of the Son of God. So yeah, we're suffering now, but the sufferings we have, the test, trials, and tribulations we're going through now, are not even worthy to be compared to the glory we're going to find on the other side. So that's important to remember, and we can expect that. And we need to be doing God's will, and so in order to find God's will, we need to look at our circumstances. God will speak to us through our circumstances, through counsel of wise Christians or Catholics, and through prayer, listening for God's voice, and finding the peace in His message. And so sometimes we think we have God's will, and it turns out we don't. There's a story where Paul thought he had God's will, and he went to a city, and God said, no. God closed the door. The door for him there was closed, and he said, nope, go somewhere else. So even Apostle Paul thought he knew God's will, but it turned out he got it wrong. But by taking action, God guided him along the way, and eventually got him where he's supposed to go. So just get going. Once you know what your goal is, you get going, and then you just be ready to adjust and vary your approach when you hit trouble. Sometimes it looks impossible, but Charles Swindoll, the famous evangelist, says, great opportunities are brilliantly disguised as impossible situations. Many people have said that, and oftentimes most people who have overcome their obstacles ultimately benefited from them in many ways, through becoming stronger, learning lessons, and persevering and gaining confidence. So we need to develop an attitude of trust, and one of three things will happen, which the Ortlunds talk about here, which is about right. One, God's going to pretty just hang in there, and pretty soon we're just on the brink, and God's going to change our situation for us. Two, it'll be later on. We're going to have to struggle for a while, but eventually He'll change our situation. Or third, He doesn't plan to change our situation, and we're gonna be in that situation until we die. But again, if we go back to that last scripture, our present trial, our present sufferings are not even worthy to be compared with the glory which God is going to be revealed to us in the end, when that glory is revealed. So we don't know what the providence of God is. We don't know what His will is for our life. Sometimes it is for us to suffer long term. It's just a fact that sometimes that happens, and frankly, we're all probably going to have to deal with that sooner or later. And so, just remember, time is short. Life is like a breath. Have you ever seen, a deer in the hills breathe? In the early morning, in the winter, there's that breath. You can see the fog coming out of their mouth, and then it just drifts away. It just vanishes. Well, that's like our life. It's very short. So just remember, just try to overcome our troubles, but regardless, life is very short. And don't quit. Persevere. If we find out we're on the wrong mission, as Paul did, then that's one thing, but persevere. And one last point before I wrap this up. Each new pressure, irritation, plan, and disappointment arrives not a moment too soon or too late. Each one is working for your good, according to Romans 8:28, and we know that all things work together for good with those who love God and are called according to His purpose. So know the providence of God, that the things that happen, the good, the bad, and the ugly, they're according to God's providence, and we'll get through it, and it'll be good when we get to the other side. So God bless you, persevere, and good night from the Midnight Bible Study.